The room was dark, the air heavy with the smell of dust and old wood. I was curled up on the cold floor, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. My father stood over me, his face twisted with anger, his fists clenched tight. I was a widow, only 22, and life had already broken me in ways I couldn't explain. But this was worse than anything I'd ever faced. His shouts filled the tiny room, each word like a slap. "You're useless, Mary. Nothing but a burden," he screamed. I tried to crawl away, my hands scraping against the rough floor, but he grabbed me by the arm and yanked me back. His grip was like iron, and then pain exploded across my face. I tasted blood, hot and metallic, dripping down my chin. My vision blurred as his fist came down again and again. I screamed, but no one could hear me in this lonely house at the edge of town. My body shook, my strength fading, and then darkness. I fainted, blood pooling beneath me, my world slipping away. But just before everything went black, I heard a sound, a creak from the hallway. Someone was there. Was it help, or something worse? Now let me take you back to the beginning, to how I ended up in that terrible moment. My name is Mary, and this is my story. I want you to listen closely because life can be hard, but it can also teach you something important if you're brave enough to learn. Have you ever felt like everything was falling apart? That's where I was, and I'm going to tell you how it all started. It was a chilly autumn morning in the small town of Willow Creek, 2 years before that awful night. I was 20, and my life had just begun to feel like it was mine. I lived in a little house with my husband, James, who had the kindest smile and eyes that sparkled like the river on a sunny day. We weren't rich, but we were happy. James worked at the mill, and I took care of our home, dreaming of the family we'd build together. Every evening, we'd sit on our porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "Mary," he'd say, "we're going to have a good life. You and me forever." I believed him. I really did, but life doesn't always keep its promises. One day, James didn't come home from the mill. I waited, my heart growing heavier with every passing hour. The stars came out and still, he wasn't there. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and ran to the mill, my breath puffing in the cold air. When I got there, I saw a crowd gathered, their faces grim. My stomach twisted. "What happened?" I asked, pushing through. A man named Tom, who worked with James, grabbed my arm gently. "Mary, there was an accident. The machine, it broke, and James, he didn't finish. He didn't need to." I fell to my knees, the world spinning around me. James was gone. Just like that, my husband, my best friend, was taken from me. The days after that were a blur. I was a widow at 20, alone in a world that suddenly felt too big. The townspeople were kind at first. They brought me bread and soup, patted my shoulder, and said things like, "You're young, Mary. You'll find your way." But their kindness faded as the weeks passed. People have their own lives, you see, and they can't carry your pain forever. I tried to keep going. I took in sewing to earn a little money, stitching dresses and shirts for the neighbors. My hands trembled as I worked, but I kept at it. I had to. There was no one else to help me, and my mother had died when I was a baby, and my father, well, he was never the same after she passed. He lived on the edge of Willow Creek in a small, crumbling house, and he'd always been a hard man. Even when I was little, he scared me. His voice was rough, and his eyes were cold, like he was always angry at the world. When I married James, I moved out of his house and swore I'd never go back. But life has a way of pulling you to places you don't want to go. One day, about a year after James died, I got a letter from my father. It was short, written in his messy scrawl. "Mary, I'm sick. I need you to come home and help me. You owe me that much." My heart sank. I didn't want to go. I didn't owe him anything, not after the way he'd treated me growing up, yelling, sometimes hitting, always making me feel small. But he was my father, and I was raised to believe family matters, even when it hurts. So, I packed a small bag and walked the long road to his house, my stomach twisting with every step. When I arrived, the house looked worse than I remembered. The The paint was peeling, the windows cloudy with grime. My father, Thomas, was sitting in a creaky chair by the fire, his face thin and pale. He looked older than his 50 years, but his eyes still had that sharp, mean glint. "Took you long enough," he grumbled when he saw me. "I'm not well, Mary. You'll stay here and take care of me." I wanted to say no, to run back to my little house, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded and started cleaning the dusty rooms, cooking simple meals, and fetching water from the well. At first, things were quiet. My father was weak, and he mostly stayed in his chair, muttering to himself. I thought maybe he'd softened with age, that maybe we could find some kind of peace. But I was wrong. As the weeks went on, his temper came back, worse than ever. He'd snap at me for the smallest things, if the soup was too cold, if I didn't chop the firewood fast enough. "You're useless, just like your mother," he'd shout. His words cut deep, but I tried to ignore them. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that I was being a good daughter. But every day, I felt smaller, like I was disappearing inside myself. One evening, I was scrubbing the kitchen floor when I heard a crash from the living room. My heart jumped, and I ran to see what happened. My father was standing there, his face red with rage, a broken plate at his feet. "You didn't wash this properly," he yelled, pointing at the shards. I tried to explain that I'd washed it carefully, but he didn't listen. He grabbed a wooden spoon from the table and threw it at me. It hit my shoulder, and I stumbled back, my eyes stinging with tears. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but he just turned away, muttering curses. That was a low moment, one of many. I started to dread waking up each morning, knowing I'd face his anger again. But I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe because I had nowhere else to go, or maybe because I still hoped he'd change. Have you ever hoped for something so much that it hurts? That's how I felt, clinging to a dream that was slipping away. Then came the night everything changed. It was late, the wind howling outside, rattling the windows. I was tired, my hands raw from washing clothes all day. My father was in a bad mood, worse than usual. He'd been drinking, something he did more and more. I was in the kitchen, trying to stay out of his way, when he called me. "Mary, get in here." His voice was sharp, like a knife. I walked into the living room, my heart racing. He was standing by the fire, his eyes wild. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he spat. "Living in that fancy house with James, looking down on your own father." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "No, father, I don't think that." But he wasn't listening. He took a step toward me, and I backed away, my back hitting the wall. "That's when it happened, the moment you heard about at the start." He grabbed me, his hands like claws, and the blows came fast. I screamed, I begged, but he didn't stop. Blood ran down my face, my body gave out, and I fell to the floor, the world fading to black. And then, that creak in the hallway. Someone was there. Was it a neighbor? A stranger? Or something else entirely? The creak in the hallway echoed in my fading mind, a sharp sound that pulled me back from the edge of darkness. My body was limp, blood pooling beneath my cheek, but that noise, it was like a lifeline. Someone was there. My heart thudded, torn between hope and fear. Was it help, or was it someone who'd make things worse? My father's heavy breathing filled the room, his shadow looming over me as I lay crumpled on the floor. The creak came again, closer now, and I heard a gasp, a soft, shaky sound, like someone trying not to be heard. My father froze, his head snapping toward the doorway. "Who's there?" he roared, his voice thick with rage, and something else, panic. My vision blurred, but I forced my eyes to stay open, desperate to see who it was. Then silence. No footsteps, no voice, just the howling wind outside. My father took a step toward the door, and I prayed for rescue, for anything to stop this nightmare. But before I could see what happened next, my strength gave out, and the world went black again. Let me take you back a little, to the days leading up to that terrible night. I want you to picture it, to feel what I felt, because this story isn't just about me. It's about finding strength when everything seems lost. Have you ever been so scared you didn't know what to do? That's where I was, and I'm going to tell you how I kept going, even when it hurt. The weeks after I moved back to my father's house in Willow Creek were like walking on thin ice. Every day, I braced myself for his anger, tiptoeing around him like he was a sleeping bear. But there were moments, small, quiet moments, that kept me from breaking completely. One of those moments came from a girl named Sarah, who lived a mile down the road. Sarah was only 15, with bright red hair and a laugh that could light up the darkest day. She'd stop by sometimes, bringing me wildflowers or a loaf of bread her mother baked. "You look tired, Mary," she'd say, her eyes full of worry. "You don't have to stay here, you know." I'd smile and tell her I was fine, but deep down I wasn't. Sarah was a low point in my day, not because she was bad, but because she reminded me of the life I used to have, the one where I could laugh and feel safe. One afternoon, Sarah came by while my father was napping. The house was quiet, and we sat on the creaky porch steps, sharing a slice of her mother's bread. The sun was warm, and for a moment, I felt like I could breathe. "Mary," Sarah said, picking at a blade of grass, "why do you let him treat you so mean?" Her question caught me off guard. I wanted to tell her I didn't have a choice, that I was trapped, but instead, I just shrugged. "He's my father," I said softly. "He's all I have left." Sarah frowned, her freckled face scrunching up. "That's not true. You've got me, and my ma says you're welcome at our house anytime." Her words were like a warm blanket, wrapping around my heart. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. But hope is a tricky thing. It can lift you up, but it can also make the fall hurt more. That same evening, my father woke up in a foul mood. I was washing dishes when he stormed into the kitchen, his face red from too much whiskey. "Who was that girl here earlier?" he demanded, slamming his hand on the table. The plates rattled, and I flinched. "Just Sarah," I said, keeping my voice low. "She brought bread." He snorted, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can have friends, huh? You think you're too good for this house?" I shook my head, my hands trembling as I scrubbed a plate. "No, Father, I don't." But he wasn't listening. He grabbed the plate from my hands and threw it to the floor. It shattered, pieces scattering like my nerves. "Clean it up," he barked, and I dropped to my knees, picking up the sharp fragments, my fingers shaking. That was a low moment, one that made me feel smaller than ever. I cleaned up the mess, my hands stinging from tiny cuts, and told myself to keep going. I had to. But deep down, I was starting to wonder how much more I could take. The days blurred together, each one a mix of small tasks and big fears. I cooked, cleaned, and fetched water, always watching my father's mood, always waiting for the next outburst. Sometimes, he'd be quiet, staring into the fire like he was lost in his own world. Those moments were almost worse, because I never knew what he was thinking, what he might do next. One day, I found something that changed things, a tiny, unexpected discovery that gave me a flicker of courage. While cleaning the attic, I came across an old wooden box tucked under a pile of dusty blankets. It was small, with a rusty lock that popped open when I pried at it. Inside was a locket, delicate and silver, with a tiny rose carved on it. I opened it, and there was a faded picture of my mother, young and smiling, her eyes kind and warm. My heart ached. I barely remembered her, but holding that locket felt like holding a piece of her. I slipped it into my pocket, keeping it secret. It was mine, something my father couldn't take away. That locket became my strength, a reminder that I was more than the scared girl in that house. I started wearing the locket under my dress, hidden from my father's eyes. Every time I felt it against my skin, I thought of my mother, of the stories James used to tell me about her. "She was brave, Mary," he'd say. "She loved you more than anything." Those words kept me going, even when things got harder. And they did get harder. My father's drinking grew worse, and with it, his temper. He'd yell about things that didn't make sense, about money we didn't have, about my mother leaving him, about me being a burden. I tried to stay out of his way, but it was like he was looking for reasons to be angry. One night, about a week before that awful moment you heard about, I was chopping vegetables for dinner when I heard him muttering in the living room. I couldn't make out the words, but his voice was low and dangerous, like a storm brewing. I kept my head down, focusing on the knife in my hand, but my heart was racing. Suddenly, he burst into the kitchen, his eyes wild. "You're hiding something, aren't you?" he shouted, pointing at me. I froze, the knife slipping from my fingers. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely there. He stepped closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "Don't lie to me, Mary. I know you're keeping secrets." I shook my head, but my hand instinctively went to my chest, where the locket was hidden. His eyes followed my movement, and his face twisted with fury. "What's that?" he demanded, grabbing my arm. I pulled back, my heart pounding. "Nothing," I said, but he didn't believe me. He yanked at my dress, tearing the fabric, and the locket fell to the floor with a soft clink. Time seemed to slow as he stared at it, his face darkening. "That's hers," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You stole it." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I found it. It's mine." But he didn't listen. He picked up the locket, his hands shaking with rage, and threw it against the wall. It hit with a crack, and I screamed, lunging for it. That's when he grabbed me, his fingers digging into my arms, and the room spun as his fist came down. That was the night it all exploded, the night you heard about at the start. The blows, the blood, the darkness closing in. And that creak in the hallway, the sound that made my father stop, the sound that might have saved me or doomed me. As I lay there, fading, I heard it again, closer now, and then a voice, a whisper, soft and urgent. "Mary, hold on," it said. But whose voice was it? And what did they want? What do you think happens next? I want you to imagine you're in that dark house with me, hearing that creak, that whisper. Who do you think is there? Share your guesses with someone, and let's find out together in the next chapter. Keep holding on to hope, because even in the darkest moments, there's a lesson waiting to be learned. Sometimes, it's about finding strength you didn't know you had. What do you think happens next, friends? That whisper in the dark, could it be a savior, a stranger, or something scarier? Share your guesses with a friend or a family member, and let's talk about who you think is coming to Mary's rescue, or if she'll have to save herself. Keep reading with us to uncover the truth in the next chapter, and remember, even in the toughest moments, there's a lesson waiting to shine through. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and comment where you are watching from. The whisper cut through the haze in my mind, sharp and urgent, like a candle flickering in the dark. "Mary, hold on," it said again, soft but desperate. My body was heavy, slumped against the cold floor, blood sticky on my face. My father's shadow loomed above me, his fists still clenched, but he was frozen, staring toward the doorway where the creak had come from. My vision swam, but I could just make out a figure, small, hesitant, standing in the shadows. My heart leapt. Was it Sarah? A neighbor? Someone who could stop this nightmare? My father took a step toward the door, his voice low and dangerous. "Show yourself," he growled. The figure didn't move, but I heard a shaky breath, then a scuffle, like someone backing away. My father lunged forward, and I tried to scream, to warn them, but my voice was gone. Pain surged through me, and my eyes fluttered shut. Just before the darkness swallowed me again, I heard a loud crash, like glass breaking, and a cry that wasn't mine. What was happening? Was the stranger fighting back, or had my father caught them? Let's go back a few days, to the moments that led up to this chaos. I want you to feel what I felt, to walk with me through the fear and the small glimmers of hope that kept me going. Life can be heavy, can it? But sometimes, the tiniest things, a kind word, a hidden treasure, can give you strength. Have you ever found something that made you feel brave, even when you were scared? That's what I was holding on to, and I'm going to share how it all unfolded. After my father threw my mother's locket against the wall, I thought I'd lost it forever. That night, after he stormed out of the kitchen, I crawled to where it had fallen, my hands shaking as I picked it up. The silver was dented, but the rose carving was still there, and the picture of my mother inside was safe. I clutched it to my chest, tears mixing with the dirt on my face. It was all I had of her, and I wasn't going to let him take it away. I hid it in a loose floorboard under my bed, a secret place where I kept a few coins and a letter James had written me before he died. Every night, I checked to make sure it was still there, like a promise I was making to myself, to keep going no matter what. The days that followed were quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that feels like a storm waiting to break. My father barely spoke to me, but his eyes followed me everywhere, cold and suspicious. I tried to stay busy, scrubbing floors, mending his clothes, anything to avoid his temper. But I could feel it building, like a kettle about to boil over. I started planning, in my head at least, how I might leave. Sarah's words kept coming back to me. You don't have to stay here. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could go to her family's house, or even leave Willow Creek altogether. But where would I go? I had no money, no family except my father, and the thought of being alone in the world was almost as scary as staying point one morning. I decided to take a small risk. My father was out, probably at the tavern, and I needed to clear my head. I slipped out of the house and walked to the edge of town, where a little stream ran through the woods. It was my favorite place as a child, a spot where I used to play with James when we were young. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and for a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. I sat on a rock, the locket hidden under my dress, and let myself dream of a different life, one where I wasn't afraid all the time. I imagined a little house of my own, maybe with a garden, where I could be free. It was a low moment, not because it was bad, but because it reminded me how far away that dream felt. As I sat there, I heard footsteps crunching on the leaves behind me. My heart jumped, and I spun around, expecting my father. But it was Sarah, her red hair glowing in the sunlight. "Mary," she called, running toward me. "I was looking for you." She plopped down beside me, out of breath, and handed me a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Mom made you some cookies. She says you need to eat more." I smiled, my chest warming at her kindness. We sat there for a while, eating cookies and talking about silly things, like the time Sarah's cat got stuck in a tree and the whole town tried to get it down. For those few minutes, I felt like a person again, not just a shadow in my father's house, but that peace didn't last. When I got back home, my father was waiting. He was sitting in his chair by the fire, a bottle in his hand, his eyes dark. "Where were you?" he demanded. I froze, the bundle of cookies still in my hands. "Just by the stream," I said, my voice small. He stood up, wobbling slightly, and snatched the bundle from me. "Sneaking off to meet people, huh? Think you can just leave me here?" He tore open the cloth, saw the cookies, and threw them into the fire. The smell of burning sugar filled the room, and I bit my lip to keep from crying. "Get to work," he snapped, pointing to a pile of dirty clothes. I nodded and hurried to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I started washing. That was another low moment, one that made me feel like I was shrinking smaller every day. But something was changing inside me. Each time my father lashed out, I felt a tiny spark of anger. Not just fear, but something stronger. I started thinking about the locket, about my mother's smile, about James's belief in me. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. A few days later, I had another visitor. It was Mr. Thompson, an old man who owned the general store in town. He came by to drop off some flour I'd asked for, but he lingered at the door, his hat in his hands. "Mary," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure my father wasn't nearby, "folks in town are worried about you. You don't look right." I forced a smile, my heart racing. "I'm fine, Mr. Thompson," I lied. He frowned, his eyes kind but sharp. "If you ever need help, you come to me, you hear?" I nodded, but I didn't believe help was possible. Not then. That night, my father's temper reached a new high. It started small. He was angry because I'd burned the bread just a little on the edges. But that was enough. He started yelling, his words slurring together, and before I knew it, he was on his feet, towering over me. I backed away, my hands up, trying to calm him. "I'm sorry," I said over and over, but it didn't matter. That's when it happened, the moment you heard about at the start of this chapter. He grabbed me, his fists flying, and I fell, blood pouring from my nose, my head spinning. The creak in the hallway came just as I was fading, and then that whisper. "Mary, hold on." And the crash of glass, as I lay there, the world flickering in and out, I heard my father's voice again, loud and panicked. "Get out of my house," he shouted, and there was another crash, like something heavy falling. My heart pounded. Whoever was there, they were fighting back, or trying to. I tried to move, to call out, but my body wouldn't listen. The last thing I heard was a scream. Not mine, not my father's, but someone else's, high and terrified. And then, footsteps, running, fading into the night. What do you think is happening, friends? Who was that in the hallway, and what did they do to make my father so angry? Was it Sarah, brave enough to come check on me? Or someone else, someone I didn't expect? Share your thoughts with someone you trust, and let's keep turning the pages together. There's a lesson here about courage and holding on, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. Stay with me for the next chapter to find out what happens next. The scream pierced the air, sharp and raw, pulling me back from the edge of unconsciousness. It wasn't my voice nor my father's. It was someone else, someone caught in the chaos of that dark night. My head throbbed, blood still warm on my face, as I lay crumpled on the floor. The footsteps I'd heard were fading now, running fast, like whoever it was had bolted into the night. My father's heavy boots stomped toward the door, his voice booming through the house. "Don't come back here," he roared, followed by the slam of the front door. My heart raced, a mix of fear and desperate hope. Who had been there? Had they come to help me, only to be chased off? Or was it someone else, someone with their own reasons for creeping into our house? I tried to move, to drag myself up, but my body screamed in pain. The room spun, and just as I thought I might crawl toward the door, I heard something new, a low, guttural growl from outside, like an animal. My blood ran cold. What was out there? Was it coming for me next? Let's step back a little, to the days before this terrifying moment. I want you to walk with me through the fear, the quiet moments, and the sparks of courage that kept me going. Life can throw you into dark places, but there's always a lesson waiting if you look for it. Have you ever felt like you were stuck, but something small gave you hope? That's what I was clinging to, and I'm going to tell you how it all led to that night. After that awful fight over the locket, I was more careful than ever. I kept my head down, moving through the house like a ghost, trying not to draw my father's attention. The locket stayed hidden in the floorboard, and every night I'd touch it, whispering to myself that I was stronger than I felt. But the truth was I was scared all the time. My father's temper was like a fire that never went out, smoldering one moment and blazing the next. I started noticing things, though, small signs that made me wonder if I was really as alone as I thought. One afternoon, I was hanging laundry in the backyard when I saw something odd. There was a footprint in the mud near the fence, too small to be my father's. Looked fresh, like someone had been there that morning. My heart skipped a beat. Was someone watching the house? I told myself it was probably just Sarah, maybe sneaking over to check on me. But when I asked her the next day, she shook her head, her eyes wide. "I haven't been near your fence, Mary," she said. "Maybe it was a kid playing a prank." I nodded, but I didn't believe it. The footprint felt like a warning, though I didn't know what it meant. Sarah was my lifeline in those days. She kept coming by, even though I could tell she was nervous. One day, she brought me a small book of poems, its pages worn and soft. "It was my grandma's," she said, pressing it into my hands. "Read it when you're sad. It helps." I hid the book with the locket, and at night, when my father was asleep, I'd read by candlelight. The words were like a warm hug, reminding me there was beauty in the world, even if I couldn't see it. Those moments were low, not because they were bad, but because they showed me how much I was missing, how much I wanted to be free, but freedom felt impossible. My father's drinking was worse than ever, and with it came his paranoia. He started locking the doors at night, checking the windows like he was expecting trouble. "People are out to get me," he'd mutter, his eyes darting to the shadows. I didn't know if he was talking about real people or ghosts in his head, but it made me uneasy. I started keeping a small knife in my pocket, not to hurt him, but to feel safer. It was a bread knife, dull and rusty, but it was something. I'd hold it when I was alone, telling myself I could be brave if I had to. But freedom felt impossible. My father's drinking was worse than ever, and with it came his paranoia. He started locking the doors at night, checking the windows like he was expecting trouble. "People are out to get me," he'd mutter, his eyes darting to the shadows. I didn't know if he was talking about real people or ghosts in his head, but it made me uneasy. I started keeping a small knife in my pocket, not to hurt him, but to feel safer. It was a bread knife, dull and rusty, but it was something. I'd hold it when I was alone. Telling myself I could be brave if I had to point one evening, I was sweeping the porch when Mr. Thompson, the store owner, came by again. He looked nervous, his hat crumpled in his hands. "Mary," he said quietly, "there's talk in town. People say they've seen someone sneaking around your house at night." My stomach dropped. The footprint. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shrugged, his eyes kind but worried. "No one knows. Could be a drifter, could be kids. Just be careful." I nodded, my mind racing. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every creak and rustle outside. Was someone really watching us?
And why?
The next day, I decided to do something bold. My father was out, and I took a chance to search his room. I don't know what I was looking for, maybe answers, maybe a way out. His room was a mess, with empty bottles and old newspapers scattered everywhere. Under his bed, I found a small tin box, locked tight. I didn't dare try to open it, but it felt important, like it held secrets. I put it back, my hands shaking, and promised myself I'd find a way to see what was inside. That moment gave me a spark of courage, a feeling that I could take control, even if it was just a little. But courage is dangerous when you're living with someone like my father. That night, he came home drunker than usual, his face flushed and his words slurred. I was in the kitchen, trying to stay out of his way, when he started yelling about money. "Where's it gone, Mary?" he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You're stealing from me, aren't you?" I shook my head, my heart pounding. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but he was already on his feet, his eyes wild. I backed away, my hand slipping into my pocket, touching the knife. I didn't want to use it, but I was so scared. That's when it all fell apart, the night you heard about at the start. He came at me, his fists flying, and I fell, blood pouring down my face. The creak in the hallway, the whisper, the crash of glass, it all happened so fast. And then that scream, high and terrified, followed by the growl outside. As I lay there, fading in and out, I heard my father cursing, his boots stomping back into the house. But there was something else, a scratching at the window, like claws on glass. My heart stopped. Was it an animal, or something worse? I tried to move, to see, but my body wouldn't listen. The scratching grew louder, and then, silence. A new sound came, soft and eerie, like someone humming a tune. It was close, too close, and it sent a chill down my spine. What do you think is out there, friends? Was that scream from someone trying to save me, or someone caught in their own trouble? And that humming, who could it be? Share your guesses with a friend, and let's keep digging into this story together. There's a lesson here about finding courage even when fear is all around you. Stay with me for the next chapter to see what's waiting in the dark. The eerie humming filled the air, soft and haunting, like a lullaby twisted into something sinister. It came from just outside the window, where the scratching had stopped. My heart pounded, each beat a hammer in my chest, as I lay on the floor, blood drying on my face. My father's heavy footsteps echoed back into the room, his breath ragged with anger and fear. "Who's out there?" he bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that felt alive, like it was watching us. I tried to move, to drag myself toward the door, but my body screamed in pain. My father spun around, his eyes wild, and for a moment, I thought he'd come for me again. But then, a loud thud against the front door, like something heavy had slammed into it. My father cursed, grabbing a poker from the fireplace, and stormed toward the sound. My vision blurred, but I saw the door rattle, as if someone or something was trying to get in. A low, guttural laugh followed, chilling my blood. Was it human? Or was it something else? Something that had no business in this world? My eyes fluttered shut, but not before I saw the door crack open. Just an inch, and a shadow slip inside. Let's go back a few days, to the moments that led to this terrifying night. I want you to feel the weight of those days with me, to see how fear can creep into every corner of your life, but also how hope can flicker, even in the darkest moments. Have you ever heard a sound that made your heart stop, something you couldn't explain? That's where I was, and I'm going to share how I got there, step by step. After finding that mysterious footprint near the fence, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The house felt different, like it was holding its breath. I started noticing things, small things, but they added up. A window left open when I was sure I'd closed it. A chair moved slightly out of place. Once, I found a single wildflower, just like the one Sarah brought me, tucked into the crack of the back door. It should have felt kind, but it didn't. It felt like a message, one I didn't understand. I didn't tell my father about these things. He'd only get angrier, and I was already walking on eggshells. But I kept my eyes open, my hand always close to the little knife in my pocket. Sarah came by again a couple of days later, her face pale and her eyes darting around like she was nervous. We sat in the kitchen, sipping tea I'd made from old leaves I found in a tin. "Mary," she whispered, leaning close, "you need to leave this place. It's not safe." I frowned, my stomach twisting. "What do you mean?" I asked. She bit her lip, glancing at the door. "I heard my pa talking to Mr. Thompson. They say your father's mixed up in something bad. Something with dangerous people." My heart sank. Dangerous people? My father was mean, sure, but what could he be involved in? What kind of people? I pressed, but Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. Just be careful, okay?" She squeezed my hand, and for a moment, I felt less alone. That was a low moment, not because it was painful, but because it reminded me how trapped I was, caught in a web I couldn't see. I started paying closer attention to my father after that. He'd always been secretive, but now he was jumpy, checking the windows and doors like he was expecting trouble. One night, I heard him talking to someone outside, his voice low and sharp. I crept to the window, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the crack in the curtains. There was a man out there, tall and thin, wearing a dark coat that blended into the night. I couldn't hear their words, but my father handed him something, a small bundle, maybe papers or money. The man nodded and slipped away into the dark. My father stood there for a long time, staring into the woods, before coming back inside. I hurried to my room, my heart racing. What was he doing? Was this what Sarah meant by dangerous people? The next day, I decided to take another risk. While my father was out, I went back to his room and found that tin box under his bed again. This time, I was determined to open it. I used the bread knife to pry at the lock, my hands sweaty and shaking. It took a while, but the lock finally gave way with a soft click. Inside, I found a stack of letters, yellowed and crumpled, and a small leather pouch. The letters were written in a messy scrawl, not my father's, and they talked about debts, big ones. Words like payment due and no more chances jumped out at me. The pouch held a few coins and a folded piece of paper with a name, Caleb Marsh. I didn't know who that was, but the name sent a chill through me. I put everything back, my mind spinning. Was my father in trouble with this Caleb Marsh? And what did it have to do with me? That discovery was a spark of courage, a low moment that made me feel like I was getting closer to answers. But courage doesn't always protect you. The next few days were tense, with my father's temper flaring at the smallest things. I burned the soup one night, and he threw the pot against the wall, the hot liquid splashing everywhere. "You're trying to ruin me," he shouted, his face red. I cleaned it up without a word, my hands trembling, but inside, I was starting to feel something new, not just fear, but anger. I was tired of being his punching bag, tired of living in this prison of a house. Then came the night you heard about. The night of the blows, the blood, and the whisper in the hallway. The scream, the growl, the thud against the door, it all happened so fast. And now, that shadow slipping through the cracked door, the low laugh that wasn't human. As I lay there, fighting to stay conscious, I heard my father's voice again, but it wasn't angry now, it was scared. "Stay back," he shouted, and I heard the poker clatter to the floor. The air felt thick, like something heavy was pressing down on the room. I forced my eyes open, just a sliver, and saw it, a figure in the doorway, not tall like the man I'd seen outside, but small, hunched, with eyes that glinted in the dim light. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't Mr. Thompson. It was something else, something that didn't belong. My father stumbled back, his face pale, and the figure took a step forward, its head tilting like it was studying him. My heart stopped as it turned its gaze to me, and then it smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that showed too many teeth. "What's happening, friends? Who or what is this thing in the doorway? Is it tied to the dangerous people Sarah warned me about? Or is it something worse? Share your thoughts with someone you care about, and let's unravel this mystery together. There's a lesson here about facing your fears even when they look like monsters in the dark. Stay with me for the next chapter to see what this creature wants, and if I can survive it." That unnatural grin froze my blood. The figure's glinting eyes locked on me as it stood in the doorway. Its smile was too wide, too sharp, like a predator sizing up its prey. My father stumbled back, the fireplace poker slipping from his shaking hands and clattering to the floor. "Get out," he shouted, but his voice cracked, fear leaking through his usual rage. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just tilted its head, the humming starting again, low, eerie, and wrong. My body ached, blood still sticky on my face, but I forced myself to crawl an inch, desperate to get away. The figure's gaze snapped back to my father, and it took a step forward, its movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. My father grabbed a chair, holding it like a shield, but before he could swing, the figure lunged, faster than anything human should move. A scream tore from my father's throat, raw and terrified, and the room erupted in chaos. Furniture crashed, glass shattered, and I heard a horrible, wet sound, like something being torn apart. My vision blurred, but I saw the figure drag my father toward the door, his screams fading into the night. Then silence. The figure was gone, and so was he. But I wasn't alone. I felt eyes on me, and a soft whisper, not from the figure, but from somewhere else in the house. "Mary, you're safe now." My heart stopped. Who was that? Let's go back a few days, to the moments that led to this horrifying night. I want you to walk with me through the fear and the flickers of hope that kept me holding on. Life can feel like a storm sometimes, can't it? But even in the worst moments, there's something to learn, something to fight for. Have you ever felt like you were being watched, like something was just out of sight? That's where I was, and I'm going to tell you how I got there. After finding the tin box under my father's bed, with those letters and the name Caleb Marsh, I couldn't stop thinking about what he was hiding. The word death stuck in my mind, heavy and dangerous. Was my father in trouble with someone like this Caleb person? And why did it feel like that trouble was creeping closer to me? I kept the knife in my pocket at all times now, its weight a small comfort, even if I wasn't sure I could use it. The house felt alive with secrets. Every creak, every shadow made me jump. I started checking the windows and doors myself, not because I cared about my father's paranoia, but because I was starting to feel it too. Sarah came by again, her visits the only bright spot in my days. She brought a basket of apples, her smile as warm as ever, but I could tell she was worried. We sat on the porch, peeling the apples with a small knife she'd brought. "Mary," she said quietly, glancing at the house, "you look scared all the time. What's going on?" I wanted to tell her everything, about the footprint, the man in the dark coat, the letters, but I didn't know where to start. Instead, I just shook my head. "It's just hard," I said. She frowned, her freckles scrunching together. "You don't have to stay, you know. My ma says you can live with us." Her words were kind, but they felt like a dream I couldn't reach. Leaving meant facing my father, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. That moment was a low one, not because it was painful, but because it showed me how stuck I felt. Sarah's kindness was like a light in the dark, but I was too afraid to follow it. I thanked her, and she hugged me before she left, her arms warm and strong. "Promise you'll think about it," she whispered. I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. The next day, I took another risk. My father was out, and I went back to the tin box. This time, I read more of the letters. They were worse than I thought. One said, "Pay by the end of the month, or we'll take what's yours." Another mentioned the girl, me. My hands shook as I read it, my stomach twisting. Was my father planning to use me to pay off his debts? The thought made me sick, but it also lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let that happen. I took one of the letters, folded it small, and hid it with the locket under the floorboard. It felt like a tiny act of rebellion, a way to take back some control. That evening, I heard my father talking outside again, his voice low and tense. I crept to the window, my heart pounding, and saw him with the same man in the dark coat. This time, the man was angry, jabbing a finger at my father's chest. I caught a few words, "Caleb won't wait," and "she's part of the deal." My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to get out, but how? I started making a plan, small, desperate, but it was something. I'd save what little money I had. Maybe ask Mr. Thompson for help. But every time I thought about leaving, fear clawed at me. What if my father caught me? What if this Caleb Marsh found me? The days that followed were a blur of tension. My father's temper was worse than ever, and I could barely eat or sleep. I kept the knife close, my hand brushing against it whenever he raised his voice. One afternoon, I was chopping wood in the yard when I heard a noise, a soft rustle in the bushes. I froze, gripping the axe, my eyes scanning the trees. Nothing. Just the wind, I told myself, but my heart wouldn't slow down. That night, I found another wildflower by the back door. This one wilted, like it had been there for days. It wasn't from Sarah. She hadn't been by. Someone else was leaving these, and it wasn't a game anymore. It was a warning. Then came the night you heard about, the night of the blows, the scream, the growl, and that figure with the unnatural grin. The chaos of my father being dragged out, the whispers saying I was safe. But I didn't feel safe. Not with that humming, that shadow slipping through the door. And now, that new whisper, "Mary, you're safe now." It came from a hallway, soft and familiar, but I couldn't place it. I forced my eyes open, my body screaming in pain, and saw a flicker of movement, a skirt, a flash of red hair. Sarah? But before I could call out, the air grew heavy, and a new sound filled the room. A low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat coming from the walls. The temperature dropped, my breath puffing in the air, and I felt it again, eyes watching me. Something was still in the house, and it wasn't Sarah. The thumping grew louder, closer, and then a hand, cold and bony, grabbed my wrist from the shadows. "What's happening, friends?" Was that Sarah in the hallway, or someone else? And what is this thing grabbing me, with its cold hand and that awful thumping? Is it tied to Caleb Marsh? Or is it something darker, something that's been waiting in this house all along? Share your guesses with someone you love, and let's keep turning these pages together. There's a lesson here about finding strength even when the world feels like it's closing in. Stay with me for the next chapter to face whatever's lurking in the shadows. The cold, bony hand tightened around my wrist, pulling me from the fog of pain and fear. My heart slammed against my chest, the thumping in the walls growing louder, like a heartbeat echoing my own. The room was freezing, my breath puffing out in white clouds, and the air felt thick, like I was breathing through a cloth. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw, my voice barely a croak. The shadow above me leaned closer, its face hidden in the dark, but I could feel its eyes, sharp, unblinking, boring into me. The thumping stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence, heavy and suffocating. Then a voice, not the soft whisper from before, but something low and raspy, like dry leaves scraping together, hissed, "You're mine now." My blood turned to ice. I yanked my arm, desperate to break free, but the grip was like iron. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air, like wood snapping, and the hand let go. I fell back, gasping, as a figure burst into the room, a real person this time, holding a lantern that cast wild shadows on the walls. "Mary," they shouted, and I recognized the voice, "Sarah." But before I could reach for her, the lantern's light flickered, and something moved in the corner. A dark shape, fast and unnatural, darting toward her. Sarah screamed. The lantern crashed to the floor, and flames began to lick at the walls. Let's go back a few days, to the moments that led to this terrifying night. I want you to feel the weight of those days with me, to see how fear can wrap around you like a chain, but also how the smallest acts of courage can keep you fighting. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, waiting for you to make a move? That's where I was, and I'm going to share how I got there, step by step. After finding those letters and the name Caleb Marsh, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father was tangled in something dangerous, something that was pulling me in too. The wilted wildflower by the door, the man in the dark coat, the whispers of debts, and the girl in those letters, they all pointed to a truth I wasn't ready to face. I started keeping the knife in my pocket at all times, its dull blade a small comfort, even if I wasn't sure I could use it. The house felt like a trap, every creak and shadow making my heart race. I checked the floorboard where I hid the locket and the letter every night, making sure they were safe. They were my anchors, proof that I had something worth fighting for. Sarah's visits were my only escape from the fear. She came by one afternoon, her red hair tucked under a scarf, her eyes bright but nervous. We sat in the kitchen, sharing a piece of bread she'd brought. "Mary," she said, her voice low, "I heard something else from my pa. He says Caleb Marsh is a bad man, someone who lends money and hurts people who don't pay." My stomach twisted. So, Caleb Marsh was real and dangerous. "Does he know about me?" I asked, my voice shaking. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Pa heard your father owes him a lot. And they're saying he might come for you if your father can't pay." Her words hit like a punch. I felt sick, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I won't let that happen," I said, more to myself than to her. Sarah squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do this alone, Mary. We'll help you." That moment was a low one. Not because it was painful, but because it showed me how deep the danger ran, and how much I wanted to believe in her help. I started planning in earnest after that. I counted the coins I'd saved from sewing, just a handful, but maybe enough to get me to the next town. I thought about Mr. Thompson, how he'd offered help, and wondered if I could trust him. But every plan felt like a thread that could snap. My father was watching me closer now, his eyes sharp and suspicious. One night, I caught him going through my things, tearing apart my small bag of clothes. "What are you hiding, Mary?" he growled, his breath sour with whiskey. I shook my head, my heart pounding, and prayed he wouldn't find the floorboard. He didn't, but he grabbed my arm, hard enough to leave a bruise. "Don't think you can run," he said, his voice low and mean. "You're staying right here." I nodded, my throat tight, but inside I was screaming. I wasn't going to be his prisoner forever. The next day, I took a bigger risk. My father was out, and I went back to the tin box in his room. This time, I found something new, a small key, tucked inside one of the letters. It was tiny, no bigger than my thumb, and it looked old, like it belonged to something important. I didn't know what it opened, but I took it, hiding it with the locket and the letter. That key felt like a piece of the puzzle, a step toward understanding what my father was caught up in. It was a low moment, not because it was bad, but because it made me realize how little I knew and how much danger I was in. The strange signs around the house kept coming. Another wildflower appeared, this one fresh, left on the porch. I found scratches on the back door, like something had clawed at it. And one night, I woke to a tapping at my window, soft but steady, like someone or something wanted my attention. I didn't dare look, but I clutched the knife under my pillow, my heart racing. The tapping stopped, but I didn't sleep again that night. I started to wonder if it wasn't just Caleb Marsh I had to fear. There was something else, something darker, tied to this house and my father's secrets. Then came the night you heard about, the night of the blows, the scream, the figure with the unnatural grin dragging my father away. And now, Sarah bursting in, the lantern crashing, the flames starting to spread. the cold hand on my wrist, the raspy voice claiming me. As the fire licked at the walls, I forced myself to move, crawling toward Sarah's voice. "Sarah?" I croaked, my throat raw. The smoke was thick now, stinging my eyes, and I could barely see her through the haze. She was on the floor, struggling with someone, in the shadows. "Mary, run," she screamed, but before I could reach her, a figure loomed behind her, tall and thin, with a dark coat that swallowed the light. It wasn't the grinning creature, it was the man I'd seen with my father, the one from the night meetings. He grabbed Sarah's arm, his face twisted with anger, and raised a knife. I screamed, lunging forward, but the flames roared higher, cutting me off. The last thing I saw was Sarah's terrified eyes, and then a deafening crash, like the roof itself was coming down. What's happening, friends? Is that man Caleb Marsh come to collect his debt? And what was that grinning creature that took my father? Is Sarah in danger because of me? Share your guesses with someone you trust, and let's keep unraveling this nightmare together. There's a lesson here about fighting for the people you care about, even when the odds are against you. Stay with me for the next chapter to see if we can save Sarah and ourselves from the flames. Wow, friends, what a wild moment in Mary's story. Who do you think that man in the dark coat is, and can Mary save Sarah from the flames? Share your thoughts with someone you love, and let's keep diving into this adventure together. Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe now so you never miss a twist in this tale of courage and survival. There's a lesson waiting for us, and we're stronger when we face it together. The crash echoed through the house, a deafening roar as the ceiling beams groaned and splintered above me. Flames roared higher, swallowing the walls, the heat searing my skin as I crawled through the smoke. Sarah's scream still rang in my ears, her terrified eyes locked on the man in the dark coat who held a knife to her throat. My heart pounded, every beat screaming at me to move, to save her, but the fire was a wall between us, spitting embers and choking black smoke. I clutched the small knife in my pocket, my hands shaking, knowing it was no match for the man or the flames. "Sarah?" I shouted, my voice hoarse, barely cutting through the chaos. The man's head snapped toward me, his eyes glinting with something cold and cruel, like he'd been waiting for me to see him. "Stay back, girl," he snarled, tightening his grip on Sarah. But before I could move, another sound tore through the air, a low, guttural growl, like the one I'd heard outside. The man froze, his face paling, and from the shadows behind him, that grinning creature appeared, its too-wide smile gleaming in the firelight. It lunged, not at Sarah, but at the man, and in a blur of motion, they vanished into the smoke. Sarah fell to the floor, coughing, but the fire was closing in, and above us, another beam cracked, falling in a shower of sparks. I had seconds to reach her, or we'd both burned. Let's go back a few days, to the moments that led to this fiery nightmare. I want you to feel the fear and the tiny sparks of hope that kept me going, to walk with me through the shadows of that house. Life can be a storm, can it? But even when it feels like everything's falling apart, there's a lesson waiting if you're brave enough to look. Have you ever felt like you had to keep going, even when you were scared? That's where I was, and I'm going to share how I got to this moment. After finding the key in my father's tin box, I felt like I was holding a piece of the puzzle, but I didn't know what it opened. The letters about debts and Caleb Marsh haunted me, and the wilted wildflowers, the scratches on the door, the tapping at my window, they all felt like warnings, like the house itself was trying to tell me something. I kept the key with the locket and the letter under the floorboard, checking them every night like a ritual. They were my proof that I wasn't just a victim, that I could fight back, even if I didn't know how yet. Sarah's words about Caleb Marsh being a dangerous man stayed with me, making every shadow feel alive with threat. I started watching my father closer, noticing how he'd flinch at noises, how he'd mutter about them coming for him. One afternoon, while he was out, I took another risk. I searched the house for something, anything that the key might fit. I checked every drawer, every cupboard, but found nothing. Then, in the attic, I saw it, a small, locked chest, half buried under old blankets. My hands shook as I pulled it out, dust clouding the air. The key fit perfectly, clicking as it turned. Inside was a bundle of papers, more letters, but these were different. They weren't about debts. They were about a deal. The girl for the land, one said, in that same messy scrawl. My heart stopped. My father was planning to trade me to Caleb Marsh to save himself. The papers mentioned a meeting, set for the end of the week, tonight. I stuffed one of the letters into my pocket, my mind racing. I had to get out now. That discovery was a low moment, not because it was painful, but because it showed me how little time I had. I started planning in earnest, counting my coins again, thinking about Mr. Thompson's offer of help. But fear kept me frozen. What if I ran and Caleb Marsh found me? What if my father caught me first? I felt like a mouse in a trap, waiting for the snap. That night, I heard my father outside again, talking to the man in the dark coat. I didn't dare look, but their voices were sharp, angry. Caleb's done waiting, the man said. You bring her or we take her. My father's reply was too low to hear, but it made my skin crawl. I clutched the knife under my pillow, promising myself I'd fight if I had to. The next day, Sarah came by, her face pale. She didn't bring anything this time, just sat with me on the porch, her hands twisting at her lap. Mary, I heard something else, she whispered. My pa says Caleb Marsh has people working for him. Not normal people. They say he deals with things that aren't human. My stomach dropped. Not human? It sounded like a story to scare children, but the scratches on the door, the tapping, the growls, they didn't feel like stories. What do you mean? I asked, my voice shaking. Sarah shook her head. I don't know. Just don't stay here, Mary. Please. I wanted to promise her I'd leave, but the words wouldn't come. She hugged me before she left, and I felt her trembling. That was a low moment, a reminder that my fear was spreading, hurting the people I cared about. The strange signs kept coming. Another wildflower appeared, this one with a drop of something dark on its petals. Blood? I found more scratches, deeper now, on the windowsill. And one night, I woke to that tapping again, but this time it was inside the house, coming from the attic. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay there, clutching the knife, until it stopped. The next morning, I checked the attic, but found nothing. Just the chest, still locked, still hiding its secrets. I was starting to feel like the house itself was against me, like it was alive with something dark. Then came the night you heard about. The night of the blows, the grinning creature, and Sarah bursting in with the lantern. The man in the dark coat, the flames, and now, this moment, with the fire closing in and Sarah on the floor, coughing, helpless. I crawled toward her, the heat burning my hands, my lungs screaming for air. Sarah, hold on, I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. I reached her, grabbing her arm, pulling her toward the door. But the fire was everywhere, and the ceiling groaned again, ready to collapse. I looked back, searching for the man or the creature, but they were gone, swallowed by the smoke. Sarah's eyes met mine, wide with fear, and she whispered, Mary, it's not over. Before I could ask what she meant, a new sound cut through the chaos, a high, piercing wail, like 1,000 voices crying at once. It came from outside, growing louder, closer, and the windows rattled as something slammed against them, again and again. What's happening, friends? What is that wail? And what's trying to get into the burning house? Is it Caleb Marsh's not human people, or something even worse? Can Mary and Sarah escape the flames? Share your guesses with someone you care about, and let's keep turning these pages together. There's a lesson here about holding on to hope and fighting for those you love, even when the world is burning around you. Stay with me for the final chapter to find out if we can survive the night. The piercing wail sliced through the roar of the flames, a sound so sharp it felt like it was cutting into my soul. The windows rattled violently, as if something massive was throwing itself against them, desperate to get inside the burning house. Smoke choked my lungs, and the heat pressed down like a heavy hand, but I clung to Sarah, pulling her toward the door. Her eyes were wide, her face streaked with soot, and she was coughing so hard I thought she'd collapse. Mary, we have to go, she gasped, her voice barely audible over the chaos. The The ceiling groaned above us, showering sparks, and I knew we had seconds before it came down. I dragged her forward, my own body screaming in pain from my father's blows, but the wail outside grew louder, closer, shaking the walls. As we reached the door, it burst open, and a gust of cold air rushed in, carrying a stench like damp earth and decay. Standing there was a figure. Not the man in the dark coat, not the grinning creature, but something worse. Tall, cloaked in shadows, with eyes like burning coals. It raised a hand, pointing at me, and spoke in a voice that echoed inside my head. "You can't run, Mary. You belong to us." My heart stopped. Sarah screamed, and I shoved her behind me, gripping my dull knife, ready to fight. But before I could move, the figure vanished, and the house shook with a final, earth-shattering crash as the roof collapsed, swallowing us in darkness. Let's go back a few days, to the moments that led to this horrifying night. I want you to feel the fear, the desperation, and the tiny glimmers of strength that kept me going. Life can feel like it's closing in, can it? But even when everything seems lost, there's a lesson waiting if you hold on. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love, even when you were scared? That's where I was, and I'm going to share how I got to this moment. After finding the chest in the attic and learning my father planned to trade me to Caleb Marsh, I felt like I was drowning in fear. The letters, the key, the wildflowers, the scratches, they all pointed to a danger I couldn't escape. I kept the knife close, its weight a reminder that I could fight, even if I didn't know how. The house felt alive with menace, every creak and shadow a threat. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, the locket around my neck, and the stolen letter tucked into my dress. They were my armor, proof that I was more than my father's victim. Sarah's warnings about Caleb Marsh and his not-human allies haunted me. I couldn't shake the image of the man in the dark coat, his cold eyes, or the growls and tapping that seemed to follow me. One afternoon, while my father was out, I went to Mr. Thompson at the general store. My heart pounded as I walked into town, expecting my father to appear at any moment. Mr. Thompson was behind the counter, his face kind but worried when he saw me. "Mary," he said, setting down a sack of flour, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I took a deep breath and told him everything about the letters, Caleb Marsh, the deal to trade me. His face darkened, and he leaned close. "Caleb Marsh is bad news," he whispered. "He's got a hold on half the town, and folks say he's mixed up with things that ain't natural. You need to get out, Mary. Tonight." He offered to hide me at his house, but I hesitated. Leaving meant facing my father, and I wasn't sure I was ready. That was a low moment, not because it was painful, but because it showed me how fear was holding me back. I went home, my mind racing. I packed a small bag, just a few clothes, my coins, the locket, the letter, and the key. I hid it under the floorboard, promising myself I'd leave the next day. But that night, I heard my father outside again, arguing with the man in the dark coat. Their voices were low, but I caught enough. "Caleb's coming himself," the man said. "He wants the girl." My father's reply was a snarl, but I couldn't hear the words. I lay awake, clutching the knife, knowing time was running out. The next day, Sarah came by, her face pale. She didn't sit down, just stood on the porch, twisting her scarf in her hands. "Mary, I heard my pa talking. Caleb Marsh is coming tonight. You have to leave now." My heart sank. "Tonight?" I nodded, my throat tight, and promised her I'd go to Mr. Thompson's. But as she left, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a shadow moving in the trees, too tall, too still to be human. It was watching us. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't want to scare her, but I knew whatever was coming wasn't just Caleb Marsh. That evening, the house felt like a cage. My father was drunk, his temper flaring over nothing. I stayed in the kitchen, trying to be invisible, but he found me. That's when it happened. The night of the blows, the grinning creature, Sarah bursting in, and the fire. And now, this moment, with the cloaked figure and its burning eyes, the wail shaking the house, and the roof collapsing. As the darkness swallowed us, I held on to Sarah, my body shielding hers. The flames were gone, replaced by a cold, unnatural silence. I couldn't see, couldn't move, but I felt something, eyes, everywhere, watching. A voice whispered, not in my ears but in my mind, "You can't escape your father's debt." My heart raced. Was this Caleb Marsh or something worse? I clutched Sarah, whispering, "We're getting out." Even as the darkness pressed closer, suddenly, a light flared, a small, flickering glow, like a candle. It came from Sarah's hand, where she held a match, trembling but alive. "Mary, move," she hissed, and we scrambled, crawling through the rubble. The air was thick with dust, but the wail was gone, and so was the figure. We reached the door, stumbling into the night, the house burning behind us. But as we ran, I saw them, shadows in the trees, moving, circling. They weren't human, their shapes twisting in ways that made my stomach churn. Sarah grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the woods, but one of the shadows stepped into our path, its coal-like eyes glowing. It raised a hand, and the ground beneath us shook, splitting open with a crack that echoed like thunder. What's happening, friends? Are these shadows Caleb Marsh's not human allies, or something tied to my father's secrets? Can Mary and Sarah escape the woods, or is the debt too heavy to outrun? Share your guesses with someone you love, and let's finish this story together. There's a lesson here about facing the darkness and fighting for freedom, no matter the cost. Stay with me for the final moments to see if we can break free. And there we are, friends, teetering on the edge of Mary's heart-pounding escape with Sarah, surrounded by those eerie shadows and a ground-shaking mystery. What do you think those glowing-eyed figures are, and will Mary break free from her father's dark debt? I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Share them with a friend or family member, and let's keep the suspense alive. Don't miss the final chapter. Subscribe now to join us for the thrilling conclusion and uncover the lesson of courage and freedom waiting in the shadows. Stay brave, and I'll see you soon for the end of Mary's story. The ground split beneath us, a jagged crack tearing through the earth with a sound like bones breaking. Sarah's hand gripped mine, her nails digging into my skin as we stumbled back from the shadow with its glowing, coal-like eyes. The burning house cast flickering light across the woods, and the air was thick with the stench of decay and smoke. The shadow figure loomed closer, its twisted form barely human, its voice echoing in my mind. The debt must be paid. My heart pounded, but I held my dull knife tight, standing between Sarah and the creature. "You're not taking us," I shouted, my voice shaking but fierce. Sarah was coughing, her face pale, but she nodded, grabbing a stick from the ground like a weapon. The shadows in the trees moved closer, their shapes writhing, and the ground trembled again. I thought of the locket, my mother's smile, and James's belief in me. I wasn't going to let this end here. But as the creature raised its hand, the air grew colder, and a new voice, deep, human, and chilling, cut through the night. "Enough. She's mine." A man stepped from the shadows, tall and thin, his dark coat swallowing the light. Caleb Marsh. His eyes locked on me, and I knew this was the moment I'd been dreading. The shadows froze, waiting for his command, and I realized my father's debt was about to claim us all. Let's go back just a little, to the final moments before this showdown. I want you to feel the fear and the fire in my heart, because this is where I learned the biggest lesson of all. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about standing up even when you're terrified. Have you ever had to face something that felt too big? That's where I was, and I'm going to tell you how it ended. The days leading up to that night were a blur of desperation. After finding the letters and the key, I knew my father had sold me out to Caleb Marsh to save himself. The strange signs, the wildflowers, the scratches, the tapping, weren't just warnings. They were tied to something darker, something tied to Marsh. I'd planned to run, to go to Mr. Thompson, but fear kept me frozen until Sarah's bravery and the fire forced me to move. As we fled the burning house, I felt the weight of my father's choices chasing me, but also the strength of my mother's locket, hidden against my chest. It was a low moment, running into the night, but it was also a spark, proof I could fight back. Now, standing in the woods, with Caleb Marsh's cold eyes on me. I felt that spark ignite. "You owe me, Mary," he said, his voice smooth but sharp, like a blade. "Your father promised you to settle his debt." Sarah clutched my arm, her stick raised, but I could feel her trembling. The shadows, those not human things, hovered, their glowing eyes fixed on Marsh. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "I'm not his to give," I said, gripping the knife. Marsh laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You think you can fight this?" "Those things," he nodded at the shadows, "answer to me. You're coming with us." I glanced at Sarah, her face set with determination despite her fear. I thought of her kindness, of Mr. Thompson's offer, of James's love. I wasn't alone anymore. "No," I said, my voice steadier now. "This ends tonight." Marsh's smile faded, and he raised a hand, signaling the shadows. They surged forward, their forms twisting, claws glinting in the firelight. Sarah swung her stick, hitting one, and it hissed, recoiling. I slashed with my knife, catching another, and it shrieked, dissolving into smoke. But there were too many, and Marsh was closing in. Then a new sound, hooves thundering through the woods. Lights bobbed in the distance, and voices shouted my name. "Mary!" "Sarah!" It was Mr. Thompson, with half the town behind him, lanterns swinging. They'd seen the fire, heard the screams. Marsh's face twisted with rage, and he pointed at me. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the shadows were retreating, fading into the trees as the townspeople approached. Sarah and I ran toward them, collapsing into Mr. Thompson's arms. He hugged us tight, his voice rough with relief. "You're safe now, girls." But it wasn't over. As the townspeople put out the fire and searched the ruins, they found no sign of my father or the grinning creature. Marsh had vanished too, but his words echoed in my mind. "This isn't over." I knew he'd come back, but I wasn't the same scared girl anymore. I had Sarah, Mr. Thompson, and the town behind me. I had my mother's locket, a reminder of my strength. The next day, I moved in with Sarah's family, and Mr. Thompson helped me start a new life, sewing and teaching the town's children to read. The shadows didn't return, but I kept the knife, just in case. The lesson I learned was simple but powerful. You're stronger than you know when you fight for yourself and the people you love. Fear can hold you, but courage can break you free. I don't know if Caleb Marsh is still out there, or what those shadows were, but I know I'm ready to face them if they come. And you, friends, don't let fear trap you. Find your spark, hold it tight, and fight for your freedom. What did you think, friends? Did Mary's courage inspire you to face your own fears? Share this story with someone you care about and talk about the moments that made your heart race. Subscribe to join us for more tales of bravery and lessons that light the way. Thank you for being part of Mary's journey. Stay strong and keep fighting for your spark.